Narayanam namaskritam naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasatim vyasam tito jayodhyayat nashtaprayasho bhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttamashuki bhaktir bhavati naistiki nigama kalpaduru karitam param shukamukaram rita dvavisamvitam pivata bhagatam rashamarayam mahora hora sikabhuvi bhavakaham Krishna swadam bhavagade dharmibhyanhesha karunastad vishamasha paranako dunodidaham Twamapiyadavashuta Vishutam Vibhu Samyapirena Vidambiriksanam Prakyahidho Maharatam Samklesha Nirvana Musanti Nanyataham Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pasaya Bhuttare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinam Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvashesa Sanyori Praskita Desana Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Hari Rama, Rama Rama, Hari Hari. Thanks very much for joining us, Jimmy and Taruni, always there. Our topic today is the ever freshness of the Lord, the names of the Lord, the kata, the topics of the Lord. And because one of you, I think Rupa Manjari and Manasanganga, asked about a virtual tour of the property, I have queued up little promotional video that we do to promote tourism as a bonus at the end of this particular Facebook Live transmission. So if you'll remind me so that I don't forget. Good morning, Lakshmi Nishringa. Hare Krishna. Our skies today are very similar to the ones that are behind me here. The autumnal / winter season here in Utah, although we have yet to have any significant snow at all. Good morning, Bhai Bhavi, my companion of the last 50 years on the other side of this wall. Part 2 today. This is the 42nd verse, 3rd chapter, 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Good morning, Rakesh, Hari Hari Bo. Justin, thanks for joining us as well. Here we go. Satu samsravayam asha maharajam parikshitam prayo pavishtam gangayam paritam paramarshabhihi. Translation: Sukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, in his turn, after having been delivered the Srimad Bhagavatam by his great father, he then passed it on to the Emperor Preaks, who was performing a vigil during the last 7 days of his life by sitting on the banks of the Ganges / Yamuna River, surrounded by sages awaiting death. And this is a really interesting fact that during those entire terminal 7 days of his life, he took not food, nor did he take drink. Isn't that amazing? Here it's described in the words of the emperor himself in the 26th verse, 8th chapter, 2nd canto. Maharash Reshaved says, Namesavo parayanti brahmana ashanadimi pibuto chitupiyusham tad bhaktyabdi vinisritam. He says, because of my drinking the nectar of Krishna's topics through the ears, and by virtue of the fact that my heart has become nourished and satisfied, my physical needs have gone away. I have no need for eating, and nothing extraordinary about fasting for 7 days. I myself, and I'm nothing to brag about, but I fasted for 35 days one time from solid food, just taking vegetable juices. And not only is it not detrimental to your health, but it's good for your health to fast for up to a month at a time if you don't have any coexisting medical conditions. But it's indicated here that he did not drink water for 7 days. The testimony of Maharash Reshaved, the great devotee of the Lord, the recipient of the nectar flowing from the lips of Sukadeva Goswami, is that if you first and foremost take care of your soul, if you feed your soul, then the bodily issues will not be so demanding. We have it just the opposite in our modern society. We starve the soul, give nothing to the soul. Everything's for the body. Gourmet foods imported at great expense from all the different corners of the world, manicures, uh, places where you can go get your nails done, get your nose hairs plucked out, get your hair cut, get a facial spa treatments, nice clothes to put on your body, a nice car to transport your body from here and there, and a nice residence in which to house your body, and nothing for the soul. With the result that although we have more for the body, more for the externalities than ever before, perhaps in the history of the world, more suicide, more crime, more depression, more dissatisfaction, because nothing is being done for the soul. If you were to go to the other extreme, like Maharash Preaks had, and exclusively take care of the soul, your bodily needs would go almost to nil. That's my prediction. So you can try it incrementally. You don't have to be extreme. Go on a 30-day fast at the end of this broadcast. But you can try to reduce your material needs and increase your chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rupa Manjari and Radhe Shyam have joined us, and Prashant has appeared on the scene, and he's already thrown up our first quote from the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The point is that these kinds of topics never get stale. If you hear from the mental speculators, the writers of mysteries and suspense novels and fiction, and even for the factual expository novels, you can't hear these things over and over and over and over again. A lot of devotees, they get jobs as truckers, long-distance haulers, and they do this so they can put kata on the sound system in their truck, and hour after hour after hour, going back and forth across the continent of the United States, 3,000 miles west and 3,000 miles east, and they never get tired of hearing Amala Bhakta reading the pastimes of Krishna, or the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, or lectures by any of the almost innumerable expert speakers and communications in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. One never becomes satiated. On the other hand, if you read an audio book of a great best-selling novel, you're going to, after you hear it, you're going to put it away and not pick up on it for several years at least. You know, basically the reason that you read it one time is you want to find out who done it, isn't it? Who done it? And once you find out who done it, that's it. You know, there's no more interest in it. Krishna Katha is not about who done it. Well, it is about who done it. Krishna done it. Krishna, aham sarvasya prabhava matasavam pravartya iti madhva bhajanti mam buddha bhava samanvidha. He's the source of all the material and spiritual worlds. From him, everything comes, and the wise worship him with all their hearts. So if you really want to know who done it, then your search is over when you come to Krishna. You can put aside all the mysteries and suspenses and fictional novels and just settle on Krishna. That's a different category of literature. You'll never get tired of hearing about Krishna. It's ever, 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 ever fresh. Rupa Goswami says, Tandeya Tandavini Ratam Vitanutanta Navali Labde Karnakuraka Nabini Karnabuddha Pishpidam. In order to even begin to touch upon or feel satisfaction in any way, shape, or form in connection with the oceanic pastimes of Krishna, Rupa Goswami wishes for thousands and thousands of sets of ears and thousands of tongues that he could relish the pastimes, name, form, and paraphernalia of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can go on listening, hearing, and chanting eternally without any cessation and without any satiation as well. On the other hand, that can hardly be said of the topics of this mundane world. Even when it bears on the subject of Krishna, if one is not a practitioner, if one is not a practicing devotee, following the processes of becoming Krishna consciousness under the guidance of someone who has already successfully executed Krishna consciousness, then even if this topic matter is Krishna, but it's presented by a speculator or a non-devotee, one cannot endure hearing that for any considerable length of time. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as well as all the acharyas, have particularly stressed that one needs to hear Krishna Katha from a realized soul like Sukadeva Goswami. If one is qualified and sincere, and if one's spiritual master is bona fide, one will not become exhausted even after hearing repeatedly. On the other hand, it is said by Prahlad Maharaj, 30th verse, 5th chapter, 7th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, Matir na Krishna parato shvatova mito bibhadyada griyabra adanta gobir vishitam tama punat panas charvita charvananam. If one is not Krishna conscious, even if one is writing about Krishna, what to speak of one who's writing about violence and sex in this material world? If one is averse to Krishna consciousness, then there's no amount of introspection, there's no amount of parliamentary discussions, there's no amount of interaction with others, which is going to inspire that person who has made a stand, a counter to the principle of becoming God conscious, counter to the principle of service. There's nothing that's going to get that kind of a person to budge. And when you have such a person who's counter to the principle of devotional service, trespassing in the area of devotional literatures, it's a great anomaly. It's a great disturbance. Shruti smriti paranadi panchaditiki aikantiki hara bhakti patavai vikapate. One should at all costs avoid reading literature about Krishna or Krishna consciousness from non-devotees. That, in fact, actually has the potential of spoiling one's potential spiritual progress. Prahlad Maharaj says, Matir na Krishna, those who have already predetermined that they're not going to surrender unto any higher cause. They're in the grand illusion that they're not controlled, that we're free and independent, that there's no controller who causes the sun to rise and set, the seasons to change, the planets to rotate on their axes. This is all coming about randomly. This is called the demoniac mentality. I know it's not considered proper to talk about demons, and I'm not talking about people with horns and pitchforks and tails, but I am talking about people who believe that all of this just came about more or less randomly by accident, and we are given carte blanche to act in any way we please and to exploit it in any way we like. This is described in a chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called The Divine and the Demoniac Natures. Asatyam. It's temporary. Apratishtam. It has no creator. It has no foundation. Apratishtam te jagad ahor anishwaram. This world is generated randomly, as it were, from lust, from the random combination of calibers. Asatyam apratishtam te jagad ahor aparishpara sambhatim kimanyat kamahaitu kam. It has no higher purpose. It has no creator. There's no intelligent designer. And there's no imperative upon us to serve a supreme personality of Godhead or to be accountable to our fellow human beings. The fate of such godless people is to adanta gobir vishitam tamasha punap panas chirvita chavananam. Their fate is to chew that which is already chewed. Nothing fresh. Nothing new. It's the same old, same old. Such souls meet with good and evil amongst the various species of life. Sometimes up and sometimes down. Sometimes a demigod and sometimes living the hellish planets. Sometimes a human being and sometimes a subhuman. But the pleasures are the same. It's the same thing which has already been chewed over and over and over and over and again. The allure, the appeal of fiction, suspense, and mystery novels is violence and sex. You don't have any lack of violence. You don't have any lack of sex in this material world. But the problem is they're just not interesting. They're not interesting, and they have no endurance. It's like a click of your finger. Chanchalam hi mana Krishna. The nature of the mind, the nature of material, temporary, bodily pleasures is that they're come and go just in a second. So much is written about them. They're so much extolled, and yet the pleasure they give is momentarily. It's not really pleasure. It's just a flickering relief from the itch of sex desire, for the itch to break something and take out your frustrations on some other thing or some other person. If you drink milk from a golden pot or you drink milk from an iron pot, isn't it true that the taste of the milk is the same? So whether you enjoy sex life and violence and eating, sleeping, mating, defending in the lifetime or in the body of a demigod, or whether you enjoy it in the body of a pig, the pleasure is actually the same. In fact, the animals have to go to less trouble to enjoy sex desire. They don't have to bring flowers or give candies or sit through a boring chick flick. The animals can just run at each other and mount each other without any compunctions or inhibitions whatsoever. The human form of life is not meant for pursuing the same mundane, hackneyed, stale pleasures that the animals and the lower creatures are doomed and condemned to pursue. In the first verse, in fact, of the 5th chapter, the 5th canto, Maharash Reshaved gives this advice to his sons. Good morning, Anjali. Thanks very much for joining us. She comments that material life really is just a bunch of itching, and what we call as pleasure is not positive pleasure. It's just a momentary relief from the itching. And then what happens when you scratch that itch and you get some momentary relief? It comes back twice as strong. So peace, contentment, satisfaction, serenity is not to be found by pursuing the itches of material sense gratification, hunger, thirst, sex desire, and violence. Prashant has already posted that recent quote from the Bhagavad Gita about the flickering nature of so-called material happiness. And thanks for joining us, John Malik, with a hi-ho, hearty Hare Krishna. Here's what Rishabh says. Nayam deha bhajan niloke kashtan karma nahate vidbujanye. Vidbujanye refers to those who eat stool. The word for pig or hog in Hindi and Sanskrit is stool eater. Sometimes we even see that dogs will eat stool as well as flesh products, roadkill. They'll gnaw on the bones of a deceased living being. Well, these kinds of pleasures, the stimulate for the tongue and the stimulation for the genitals and the rush, the adrenaline rush of getting your hackles up and baring your teeth at a prospective enemy, these are everywhere. We see them daily. They're so quotidian, they're so mundane, they're so common. We don't elbow our partner and say, oh, look, there's a dog having sex. Or, look, there's two cats getting their backs up at each other. Or, there's a llama enjoying a nice mouthful of hay and chewing its cud. These things are not noteworthy at all. So common, and yet your bestsellers, your most popular novels, basically it's the same subject matter as what is preoccupying the lives of the animals. And so therefore, Rishabh says, having achieved the rare and valuable form of life, then why would you sell out pursuing the same pleasures which are freely available to the animals? If we want the same pleasures that the animals have without any trouble at all, we have to undergo great trouble and difficulty to eat at a nice restaurant, to date a nice girl, to have nice transportation, to live in a good house. Animals basically have these things without a bunch of brouhaha. But in order for us to imitate the animals, we have to spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on a house, $50,000 on a car. God knows what you have to spend over a prolonged course of time to have that beautiful girl on your arm. So when we have the unique and valuable opportunity in the human form of life to satisfy the hankerings of the soul by drinking the ever-fresh topics of Krishna through the ears, the consequence of which is that the bodily needs diminish almost to nil. Why wouldn't we take that option? Crude example, if you're hungry and you're eating food, every mouthful of food that you eat, your hunger goes a little bit further away. And after you've satisfied yourself with a good meal, the hunger is nowhere to be found. Simply, the more you satisfy the soul, the more the physical needs and demands abate, the less they harass and tyrannize you. Our process, unfortunately, is just the opposite in this modern society. We want to satisfy the body, and we think that by caving into the cravings of the body, that some or other we, as an eternal living being, will achieve satisfaction. Never has happened in the history of the world, and it's never going to happen. No matter how much you believe in it, no matter how much you depend on it, no matter how much you put your faith in sense gratification, it's a formula for being cheated, frustrated, and disappointment. And the evidence, of course, is the unrest and disquietude which we see spread throughout the face of the globe. On the other hand, when you hear about your eternal creator, your eternal loving Father Krishna, you awaken a type of transcendental happiness which transcends material happiness and which continues forever. This is also verified in a conversation between the great sage Vidura and Maitreya. Vidura was asking questions of Maitreya. Prabhupada points out in the purport that Vidura was a seasoned veteran transcendentalist. Vidura never traipsed into the mundane world throughout the entirety of his life. He always was on the transcendental platform. So we can safely assume that the things that Maitreya was speaking to Vidura about Krishna, Vidura had heard them hundreds, if not thousands of times before. And although he's taking the role of the listener, the recipient, the disciple, in this interchange, there would have been many other instances where Vidura would have been instructing, as the spiritual master, a less advanced disciple. Narada Muni says, how does that go? Gunadikam mudam lapshed anugrasham ganamaram maitram samarat anvicha nata per abhiduyate. That's in the 4th canto, I believe, of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the connection with Dhruva Maharaj, Narada Muni says, when you meet a peer, develop friendship. When you meet someone who's superior, more advanced than you in spiritual life, serve them and learn from them. And when you meet someone who's not advanced as you are, teach them, mentor them, guide them. He says, if you react in these 3 different ways to 3 different categories of seekers, then you'll mitigate all the miseries of material life. So in this instance, Vidura was taking the role of a subordinate, listening to Maitreya. In other instances, he would have been the superior spiritual authority, discoursing and mentoring other less advanced living beings. So Prabhupada points out in the purport to this verse that Vidura must have been intimately familiar with the subject matters and heard thousands and thousands of times previously, and yet this is what he says to Maitreya. He doesn't say, stop, enough already, I've heard this 100 times before, can't we cover some new ground, go somewhere fresh? He doesn't say that. This is what he says in the 5th chapter, 7th verse, 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Kridan vidadate dvija go sharanam semaya karmani avataram veda manona tripyanti api srinvatam ya shushloka mulis charitam ritani. Vidura says to Maitreya, please continue. Don't stop, don't pause, don't even hesitate, but continue. Just like sometimes in the old days when the king had a lot of money and he wanted to do a really elaborate sacrifice, he would take pride in the fact that for several hours or several days, he would supply enough ghee he would pay for enough ghee, which is purified butter, for the priest to make a continual stream of ghee, an unbroken stream of ghee onto the sacrificial fire. There would not be any lapse, there would not be any gap or hiatus. So Vidura is saying to Maitreya, he's not saying, hey, we need a break. Let's take 5. He's saying, don't let the stream of nectar which you're pouring into my ear and which is satisfying, don't let it be interrupted for even a moment. Keep it continuous. Keep the flow uninterrupted. So he says, you may narrate about the auspicious characteristics of the Lord in his different incarnations. That means there's no lack of subject matter. The Lord has multifarious incarnations which have appeared throughout the entire course of the history of millions and millions of universes over a vast, unending, unbeginning, unending period of time. Ramadi Mortishu Nana Kala Niminatishtandan Avataramakarod Krishna Swayam Samabhav Paraman Govindam Adipurisham Tamahang Bhajami. There's ample subject matter, but there's no bar against revisiting over and over and over and over again, even the same stories and the same pastimes. So he says here, review the auspicious characteristics of the Lord in his different kinds for the welfare of the twice born, the cows and the demigods. Our minds are never satisfied completely, although we continuously hear of his transcendental activities. Prabhupada says, in distinction to this, the pleasure in mundane literature, after it is read once, becomes stale, and people do not take any interest in reading this literature repeatedly. Are we right or are we wrong? You know we're right. Newspaper, for instance. Everyone's so eager to go out on their front stoop and get the newspaper or go online, go online, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. They want to know what happened while I was asleep. What's the latest scoop? What's going on in the world? And then after 10 or 15 minutes, realize not much that's different. Pretty much what happened today was not that different from yesterday. Sex, violence, greed, lust, anger, all generated by the unabated rush to indulge unlimitedly one's senses. People are so eager to get the newspaper, and then after reading the newspaper for half an hour, it's thrown into the rubbish bin. Right? It's thrown into the rubbish bin. Prabhupada told a funny story about people's attachment to the newspaper. He told about how a Christian missionary once went down into the mines in Wales, and he wanted to strike the fear of God into these miners, some or other bring them to a point of wanting to convert to Christianity to save themselves from going to hell in their next lives. So he tried to describe hell to them in such a way as to strike the fear of God in their hearts. They're down in the mines, and the Christian is telling them, you don't want to go to hell. You have to accept Christ in this life so you can avoid hell. And they said, what is hell? He said, it's deep. It's dark. There's no light. It's depressing. So they're in the mines, right? So the miners are looking around at the mine where they're in, deep underneath the earth, dark, potentially depressing. And they're thinking, well, what's so bad about that? That's where we spend the days of our lives. So the Christian missionary was saying he wasn't really achieving the desired effect of striking fear of hell into the hearts of his potential converts. So he's reaching down for something that would shock them and alarm them and make them want to seriously accept the lotus feet of Lord Jesus Christ. So then he said, in hell, there are no newspapers. So then the miners said, oh, horrible. What do we have to do to accept Lord Jesus Christ? We can't go to a place where there's no newspapers. And yet, as much as the newspaper is hankered after and sought, every morning, within an hour, it's in the dustbin, or it's put somewhere where it can be used for toilet paper. But the beauty of such transcendental literatures as the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam is that they never become old. Just like Krishna, he's always fresh. Advaitam achyutam anadam anantarupam ajamparana purusha navayovanam cha. Krishna appeared 5,000 years ago in his original spiritual, eternal, imperishable form. He was on the planet for 125 years. He spoke the immortal classic of the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, in the 90th year of his manifested pastime. And if you look at the various covers of the editions of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see Krishna more often than not speaking to Arjuna. They may be most likely sitting on the chariot where Arjuna is the warrior and Krishna is the chariot driver. And did you ever see Krishna looking like he was 100, like he was 90 years old? Although he was in the 90th year of his pastimes, he never looks more than about a youth of 16 or 20 years old. Parana Purusha Navayovanam Cha, although he's the oldest, he existed before this manifested creation. He'll continue to exist after this manifested creation in his extended and expanded incarnations as Paramatma, the Supersoul. He enters into and pervades and supports the entire material creation. But in his original form, time and matter have no control over him. He's the Lord. Kaloshmi Loka Sayakrit Pravito. He's the Lord of time. He's the Lord of matter. He controls time and matter. Time and matter do not control him. They cannot affect his body. And so when you think about it, the all-powerful Lord would never be aged. He would never have white hairs, never have wrinkles, never grow old, but always be a fresh, blooming youth. And as Krishna is always and perennially fresh and blooming, similarly, the subject matters about Krishna are also fresh and blooming. They never become old. They're never stale. Since Krishna departed 5,000 years ago, there have been thousands and thousands of books written about Krishna. And even before Krishna came and went, his transcendental form was well known by greats and saints and realized sages. So there's a history of minimum 5,000 years describing and discussing the topics and appearances and pastimes of Krishna by not only great learned scholars, but common men have enjoyed dramas and pastimes and recitations of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana for tens of thousands of years. These topics have remained ever fresh, not only by learned scholars and devotees, but even to the common man, even after daily repetition for thousands and thousands of years. There is never any satiation, especially for the great devotees like Vidura. Prabhupada says, Vidura might have heard the pastimes of the Lord many, many times before he met Maitreya, but still he wanted the same narrations to be repeated because he was never satiated by hearing them. That is the transcendental nature of the Lord's glorious pastimes. Similarly, after having heard the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita and repeated them to his blind master Dhritarashtra, Sanjaya, Dhritarashtra's secretary, Dhritarashtra's friend, and in fact the narrator of the Bhagavad Gita, he says in what is the virtual last or second to last verse of the immortal narrative of the Bhagavad Gita, which consists of the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, Sanjaya says, Rajan, he says, O king, O Dhritarashtra, samsrita samsmritya shambhadan imam adbhutam, means I've got goosebumps all over my body and my hair is standing on end. Keshav Arjuna, Keshav is Krishna, Arjuna is Arjuna, Punyam, He says, dear king, Rishami cha mahor mahor. Sanjaya says, I am repeatedly recalling. I am going over and over and over in my mind the recitation of the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita from Krishna to Arjuna. I repeatedly recall this wondrous dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, and I take pleasure being thrilled at every moment. Prabhupada says the understanding of the Bhagavad Gita is so transcendental that anyone who understands it beyond just superficially, beyond just academically, who understands this subject matter and these topics through the disciplic succession from a bona fide spiritual master, as is recommended in the Bhagavad Gita, that person becomes righteous. The more that one hears, even if it's the same subject matters over and over and over again, the more one's heart becomes purified of ignorance, madness, contamination, sense gratification, delusion, and the more that one emerges from the darkness into the light, the result of which is that one gets newer and newer and newer and fresher realizations, even from the very, very same subject matter. And the reason it is always fresh is because the listener is always growing, is always maturing, is becoming increasingly enlightened, as a result of which he enjoys life as a thrill, not only for some time, not a temporary charge, not a temporary jolt, but one who is getting repeatedly cleansed and enlightened by hearing the topics of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, experiences a thrill at every single moment. And this is confirmed in the 10th chapter, 10th verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami bodhi yogam tam yena mama vyanti te. Krishna says, to those who are constantly devoted to serving me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Sorry, it appears that I have not muted my phone in the background there. Similarly, in the Bhagavad Gita itself, as we discussed yesterday, Krishna says, try to contact me through a bona fide representative of the disciplic succession. Electricity is everywhere, but you can't just pull it from here and there. You have to plug into the outlet, and the outlet itself is connected all the way back to the powerhouse, which draws electricity from wind or solar or natural sources. But without connecting your plug into the outlet, it doesn't do you any good that you're surrounded by potential electricity. You have to know the process of connecting with it and taking advantage of it. Similarly, ever fresh, eternal, dynamic, enlightening, purifying spiritual knowledge has to be accessed through the disciplic succession, through the bona fide spiritual master. And if one is a sincere seeker, sincere inquirer, following in the footsteps of such as Maharash Preaks, Vidura, as well as Arjuna, one will approach a spiritual master with submissive inquiries and the predication to do service, assuming that a bona fide spiritual master is working to spread the glories of the Lord everywhere for the benefit of people in general. One should be prepared not just to waste the spiritual master's time with useless inquiries, but one should inquire in such a way as to dissolve one's doubts. Doubting is a sign of a healthy, inquiring mind, and Krishna is Madhusudan. He's there to resolve. He's more than ready and willing to resolve your doubts in the form of the spiritual master. But as those doubts are resolved, that should free you and empower you to serve in the mission of the spiritual master to help elevate and uplift and enlighten the souls who are suffering in this dark material world. That will do good to them, and that will do good to you. Prabhupada says the Lord himself is Jagat Guru. As he explains, he originally established the disciplic succession with Vibhashwan. It was passed down. He established it again with Lord Brahma. He's reestablishing it before Arjuna in the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. All perfect, infallible knowledge has to come from a perfect, infallible source. It is said that the principles of religion can only be enunciated by God. No one else can concoct or manufacture the principles of religion. Na vai Vidura risho napi dem, not the demigods, not the rishis, not siddha mukhya ashura manusha, not human beings, not the asuras, not the siddhis, the perfected mystic yogis, kutas na vidyarada charanarya, neither the vidyaradas nor the charanadas, dharmam tu shakshat bhagavat pranitam. Perfect, impure, infallible knowledge can only be enunciated by he who is perfect, pure, and infallible. Therefore, God is the original guru. No one else can manufacture or concoct or make up their own process for religion. So Krishna has authorized the knowledge which is there in the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. His authorized representatives are sharing it and discussing it and churning it amongst each other. And if we are so fortunate as to connect, to hook into that disciplic succession, our lives are perfect. Prabhupada says here, real religious principles are enacted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although fully situated in goodness, even the rishis who occupy the topmost planets cannot ascertain real religious principles, nor can the demigods who live in Swarloka, nor the leaders of Siddhaloka, to say nothing of the demons, ordinary living beings, charanadas, and vidyadatas. The path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. Therefore, mental speculation or dry arguments cannot help lead one to the right path. One has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to receive transcendental knowledge. And if one connects with the source of all bliss, all knowledge, and all eternity through the bona fide spiritual master, one can expect to experience life as a thrill at every moment. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we can discuss around and about the same subject tomorrow, and it'll still be fresh. It won't get stale. That's why generally we spend 3 or 5 days on each verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Tell me what mundane literature or philosophy that you could spend 5 days on each verse, on each sentence. We could spend 5 months, we could spend 5 years on each verse. So you won't be chagrined, you won't be put off or crestfallen when I announce to you that we'll be back tomorrow discussing the same verse for our purification and for our enlightenment. Well, thank you for taking this journey, Tracy, Rupa Manjari, Prashant. See, these are all the ones that have liked. Oh gosh, now I clicked the wrong thing. Now we're in trouble. Okay, we have 21 likes. If you're with us, go ahead and click like. Honestly, it won't hurt you, and it'll help promote us, push us up amongst the Facebook algorithms, and I'll also be inspired by seeing you there. So the likes: Tracy, Kanti Selig, Sundari Priya, Divya Joshi, Dayanidhi, thank you, Jaya Murari, Anjali, John Malik, Ram Kishore, Chaitanya Mangala, Raleigh, Radhe Sham, Justin, Rakesh, Lakshmi Nashringa, Jimmy and Terry, Rupa Manjari, and 2 more. I can't see that. So we have 39 comments, and we have 23 likes. Go ahead, continue to comment, continue to like, especially share if you think these could be beneficial to any of your friends who might be going through a rough patch. Yes. And as I promised you, some of you have asked about a virtual tour of our property here in Spanish Fork. There is a little video, a couple minutes long, that one of our in-house residents put together last year to promote more visitation to the temple. So let me just share the screen here and bring up this video, bring it to full screen, enter full screen, and play it for you, shall we?
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare
All right, I hope that went some distance to satisfy your curiosity about our facilities here. I'll try and find other videos. There's certainly plenty of them, and show them periodically. But let me also congratulate those of you who donated during our birthday fundraiser. A generous constituency poured in $5,500 for improvements to the property. And those included three things. One was that we renovated the fountain in the middle of our 200,000-gallon lake, which now sprays water very beautifully and gorgeously. It purifies the water also for the sake of the health of the fish who live therein. We also reprinted a billboard, a 16-foot high by 48-foot long billboard on Interstate 15 going north. All the traffic coming from Vegas and Los Angeles heading for Salt Lake City and Yellowstone has to pass this billboard. It's extremely prominent on the northbound side of the road. In fact, it features this particular picture, which is behind me, of the temple. There we go. So we changed the sign because it was getting sun faded. We used some of your kind donations for that. We used some of your kind donations for the fountain. And we also birds have been getting up in the crevices and crannies on the veranda of the temple, and then they kind of, we encourage birds, we feed them, and we have kind of a bird sanctuary here where millions and millions of birds reside. Peacocks and parrots and doves and finches and sparrows and starlings and magpies, and we even have some owls at night and hawks that fly around during the day. Who have been trained not to pull the fish from the pond, by the way. But we don't want them nesting inside the veranda, because then all kinds of debris comes down on the porch, and then visitors give us a negative review on TripAdvisor, and so we've had to clean up the veranda area. And so we had a quote for $3,000 to patch all the cracks and crevices, and we'd post pictures of that, but it's not very dramatic, seeing some guy cocking on the veranda. And there are plenty of other places on the property for the birds to live, so don't agonize over the well-being of the birds. They know how to adapt themselves. They don't necessarily need a Hare Krishna temple to live in when there are plenty of trees on the property. So once again, thank you all for joining us. I enjoy so much our Monday Motivational Mondays, Transcendental Tuesdays, Wisdom Wednesdays. And I appreciate so much you taking the time out of what must be busy schedules and different time zones and different parts of the country, and you all have different careers and different family situations, different vocational situations. But yet some or other, a significant number of you see fit to join me on these mornings, and I can't tell you how appreciative I am of that. Let me know what I can do for you. Let me know how I can serve you, and I will look forward to having one more session this week with you on this very, very same verse. Not surprising after what we said today. We'll be back tomorrow with the 42nd verse, 3rd chapter, 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, part 3. So if you'd like to sign off with me by chanting the Maha Mantra with relish, with the hankering that we wish we'd had thousands of sets of ears and thousands of tongues to even partially taste the nectar which is generated by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare. And we have to do it after that build-up at least one more time before we sign off. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.